It was exactly 2 o'clock when the night broke apart. The sea was in revolt, as though something beneath its black belly had finally stirred awake. The tide crashed against the cliffs in furious succession, wave after wave, exploding with such violence that the rocks themselves seemed to groan in protest. The sound was more than noise. It was like the wailing of 1,000 drowned souls, their cries mingling with the storm. Above, the sky was no safer. It had filled with monstrous clouds, swollen and heavy, pressing low enough to suffocate. Lightning tore brief wounds in the darkness, silver veins slashing through black, under-rolled like the footsteps of a titan, shaking the bones of the earth. It was not simply a storm, it was judgment. And then it came. A scream. It cut through the roar of the sea, sharper than lightning, more terrible than thunder. It didn't belong in the world of the living. It was no human voice. No. Nor was it the cry of any animal that had ever crawled or flown. It was something else. Something caught in that ghastly purgatory between life and death. Neither spirit nor flesh, but a grotesque imitation of both. The scream rose and twisted, echoing across the cliffs, stabbing into the hearts of those few villagers still awake in their cottages. Every dog barked, every child stirred, and when the last note of it faded, silence returned like a wound trying desperately to close. The villagers knew where it had come from, all of them. They had heard that cursed scream before, the lighthouse. At the far edge of the jagged coastline, its silhouette stood against the raging sky, tall, narrow, defiant. But tonight, no beam shone from its crown. Tonight the lantern was dead. And every soul in that village knew the old saying, whenever the light goes out, someone never comes back. The village clung to the cliffs like a barnacle, small and stubborn. Only a few dozen cottages, roofs slick with moss, walls beaten by salt and time. The people lived as their fathers and grandfathers had, fishermen, net menders, boat builders. Their lives depended on the sea, though it gave as much as it took. Above them, always loomed the lighthouse. The villagers called it the last lantern. It had guided their fathers home through storms, saved countless lives from the jagged rocks that waited beneath the waves. To the fishermen, the lantern was a guardian, a silent sentinel against the wrath of the ocean. But with reverence came fear. The story had been whispered for more than 100 years. Children grew up hearing it. Mothers spoke it in hushed voices. Old men muttered it in pubs when the fire burned low. The first keeper of the lantern had been a man named Kellyon, solitary figure, proud and strange. For years he tended the flame faithfully. Then one night, without reason, without warning, he slaughtered his wife and children inside the tower. No one knew why. The villagers found the bodies, twisted and broken, scattered across the stone floors. But Kellyon himself had vanished. His body was never recovered. Some swore they saw him wandering the cliffs at night, his beard dripping seawater, his eyes like drowned coals. And then it began. Nights when the lantern, though automated later, would snuff itself out, without warning, without cause. Each time it did, someone disappeared. Sometimes a fisherman on the water, sometimes a villager walking home late, sometimes an entire boat swallowed whole. The people called it the Keeper's Curse, but time dulled terror. Years passed without incident. The lantern kept its flame. The story faded to little more than a fireside tale. It was into this false sense of safety that for university students wandered, cameras and notebooks in hand, hungry for a story. Emily, the bold one, though her courage often cracked at the edges. Daniel, their cameraman, who laughed loudest but quaked fastest. Sophie, precise and studious, every moment reduced to notes in her worn journal. And Mark, the leader, brash, stubborn, fearless to the point of arrogance. They had come for a documentary. What they found would never let them leave. By the time they reached the cliffs, the storm was clawing at them with cold fingers. Salt spray stung their faces, wind howled in their ears. Their jackets might as well have been paper. The lighthouse rose before them, black as obsidian, its windows blank like blind eyes. No glow, no warmth, only silence. Against the storm, it looked less like a tower and more like a tombstone. Mark, of course, grinned. He pulled his hood tighter and turned to Daniel's camera. This is it. The legend of the last lantern. First shot's right here. Ghosts or no ghosts, We've got gold." The others weren't so sure. Emily had stopped short. She stood rigid, her breath fogging in the air. To her, the wind wasn't only a gale-it carried words, faint, curling through the storm, like whispers brushing just against her ear. She turned sharply, peering back toward the cliffs. Only blackness. Only waves foaming white against the rocks. Yet the whispers lingered, gnawing at the edge of her thoughts. The others called her. She forced herself forward. When Mark pushed open the corroded door, it shrieked like an animal. From the darkness inside, a wave of air spilled outward. It reeked of damp and rot, the suffocating breath of sealed graves. Daniel gagged, pulling his shirt over his nose. Christ, that smell. Guess Kalian didn't believe in housekeeping. His laugh was thin, forced. Inside, their footsteps stirred a chorus of groans from the wooden floorboards. The walls were streaked with damp fungi blooming in strange hand-shaped patterns. Shadows seemed to cling too long, as if reluctant to leave. The lighthouse had not welcomed them. It had swallowed them whole. Hours bled away as they explored the tower. The spiral staircase groaned beneath their weight, iron rails slick with rust. Each level was the same stone walls weeping moisture, forgotten rooms filled with dust and silence. Sophie was diligent. Every observation she muttered, she wrote down. The drafts here, unusually strong, might be due to collapsed vents. Her pencil scratched endlessly, the sound sharp in the hush. But then it came, the sound that silenced even her footsteps. Above them, at first faint, then heavier, deliberate. A presence moving where no presence should be. Mark froze mid-step. He lifted his flashlight, its beam trembling against the ceiling. No one else is here, just us. But the sound continued, slow, deliberate, pressing downward through the boards above. Then, as suddenly as it began silence, Daniel's camera shook, his voice cracked. That wasn't the wind. Tell me you heard that. Emily's answer was barely a whisper. No, not a person, not a human, something else. It was 3 o'clock when they reached the crown. The storm battered the windows, rain lashing against the glass. The great lamp loomed above them, dead. This isn't right, Sophie murmured, flipping through her notes. Records said it was automated. Even now it should burn. Mark smirked, his arrogance a shield. He reached to touch the great glass bulb, then yanked his hand away. Jesus, it's like ice. Emily stepped back, her breath catching, for in the reflection of the giant lens, she saw a face. It's not hers. The face of an old man, beard dripping as if seawater clung to it still. His hollow eyes stared directly into hers. Emily's scream tore through the lantern room. The others rushed to her, panicked on their faces. She pointed trembling to the glass, but the reflection was gone. Hallucination, Daniel stammered. Storms got you rattled. Emily shook her head violently. No, he was there, watching, right there. 8. And then the lantern burst to life. Blaze was sudden, blinding. White light filled the chamber, scorching their vision. The beam stretched outward, cutting across the sea. For a heartbeat, the storm seemed to recoil. Then the water boiled. Figures rose from the waves, dozens, pale, swollen bodies, their eyes empty sockets, their limbs jerking as if pulled by invisible strings. They were corpses yet not corpses, the drowned risen. And all of them drifted toward the lighthouse. Daniel dropped his camera, the crash lost in the roar. God help us! What the hell are they? The lantern burned, but it did not save. Its light was no longer a beacon. It was a summons. The storm never truly left, lingered on the horizon like a beast, too stubborn to die, its voice rumbling deep in the sea. Emily had barely slept. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw them, those pale faces pressing against the lighthouse glass. They didn't blink, they didn't breathe. They simply stared with hunger so ancient it didn't need language. When dawn arrived, pale and gray, she almost convinced herself it had been a nightmare. Almost. Daniel brewed coffee, his hands trembling so violently that half the grounds ended up on the counter. We can't stay here, he said. This place isn't safe. No place is safe anymore, Sophie whispered, hugging her knees. Not with them out there. Mark sat by the window, staring at the horizon. They're not just out there, he muttered. They're here. Emily's stomach twisted. What do you mean? Mark turned his head, and for a brief, heart-stopping second. Emily thought his skin looked too pale, too slick, as if seawater clung to him. But then he blinked, and he was just Mark against, wetty, sleepless, terrified. "I heard them last night," he said. "I think inside the walls. Crawling, like they've been waiting under this place all along." The room grew colder. Outside, gulls circled the ruined shore, but their cries were distorted, almost human. Emily forced herself to speak. "We need to leave. Today." But deep down she wondered if leaving was even possible. They found the diary in the afternoon. Emily was searching the keeper's quarters for supplies, anything they could use for escape, when she noticed a false panel in the floorboards. Beneath it lay a small leather-bound book warped from damp, its pages stained with salt. She opened it carefully. The ink had bled in places, but the words were still legible. July 13th, 1892. "The drowned ones came again last night. I told them the beacon would shine, that I would keep it lit, but they do not forgive. They want me to join them in the dark." Emily's hands trembled as she flipped through more pages. August 2nd. "Their faces press against the glass, the same faces I saw sink beneath the waves years ago. I hear their voices in the tide, calling my name. I am their servant now. The beacon is no longer mine, belongs to them." At the last entry, dated October 31st, the ink trailed off violently, as if the pen had been ripped away. Emily shut the diary and looked at Daniel, Sophie, and Mark, who had gathered around her. "This place was never just a lighthouse," she said, her voice shaking. "It's a gate." Daniel rubbed his face. "A gate to what?" The waves answered for her, slamming against the rocks with a roar that sounded too much like laughter. That night, Sophie disappeared. One moment she was sitting on the stairwell, staring into the lantern room above. Next, the wind howled and the door banged open. Emily ran upstairs just in time to see Sophie walking barefoot toward the edge of the cliffs, her nightgown whipping around her in the storm. "Sophie," Emily screamed. But Sophie didn't turn. She walked as if entranced, her arms outstretched, eyes glassy. From the sea, voices rose, a haunting chorus of songs so beautiful it made Emily's heart ache. It was music that promised peace, warmth, reunion. She almost followed Sophie herself. Almost. Daniel grabbed Emily's arm, pulling her back from the threshold.
"Don't listen!"
he shouted. Mark rushed outside, slipping on the wet rocks. Sophie stopped, but Sophie never stopped. She stepped onto the jagged edge of the cliff, swayed once, and leaped into the boiling sea below. The voices vanished. The silence afterward was worse than the song. Emily collapsed to her knees, sobbing. She didn't need to look to know what Sophie would become. By morning, the storm had returned in full fury. Rain hammered the lighthouse, and waves clawed at the rocks with desperate hunger. But worse than the storm was the water rising from below. Emily woke to the sound of rushing liquid. When she stumbled down the stairwell, she found the lower rooms flooding, seawater pouring through cracks in the stone. Floating in the black water were things that should not have been their hands, pale and boneless, reaching upward. Faces half-formed, with mouths opening and closing like fish gasping for air. "They're coming in," Daniel said hoarsely. "Colette, the lighthouse won't hold." Mark backed against the wall, his eyes wide. "We have to go up, higher." So they climbed floor by floor, the water chasing them, filling every room with the stench of the ocean. By the time they reached the lantern room at the top, the entire tower groaned with strain. The glass windows rattled violently, and Emily swore she saw more faces pressed against them. Hundreds, maybe thousands, each one staring, waiting. The sea wasn't outside anymore. It was inside, and it wanted them. That night, they weren't alone in the lantern room. At first, Emily thought it was just the storm playing tricks on her eyes. A shadow moved across the room, though no lightning flashed. A man's shape, tall, gaunt, his uniform soaked with salt, his hat tilted low. The lighthouse keeper. He stepped into the light, his eyes black pools of water, his lips blue and cracked. He smiled at them with teeth that dripped seawater. "You've kept it burning," he rasped, his voice the grind of stone on stone. "Good. The beacon must never die." Daniel raised the rusted crowbar he'd found earlier. "What? Stay back." The keeper laughed, the sound bubbling like something drowning. "You can't fight the tide. It takes all. It took me. It will take you. Mark fell to his knees, clutching his head. He's right. It's useless. Emily grabbed Mark's shoulders, shaking him. Don't listen. But Mark's eyes rolled back, and a thin stream of seawater spilled from his mouth. He gagged, convulsed, then stilled. When he opened his eyes again, they were black. The keeper reached out and touched Mark's shoulder. Another soul for the deep, Emily screamed. There were only two left now, Emily and Daniel. The lantern room shook violently, its glass fracturing under the weight of the storm. Below, the sea had swallowed the entire island, turning the lighthouse into a lone pillar jutting from the endless dark. The drowned pressed closer, their faces smeared against the glass, their hands scraping like claws. Mark was among them now, his face pale, his eyes empty. Sophie too, her hair floating around her as if she were still underwater. The keeper stood beside the beacon, his hollow eyes fixed on Emily. The light must burn, said again, his voice booming like thunder. Feed it, or join them. Emily looked at Daniel. He was pale, exhausted, but his grip on her hand was steady. We can't let it take us, he whispered. Better to end it here than serve them forever. She knew he was right. Together, they moved to the beacon. Emily ripped free the diary she had carried from her pocket, its pages still damp with salt. Without hesitation, she threw it into the flame. The light roared higher, blazing so brightly it seared their eyes. The drowned shrieked, clawing at the glass, their faces melting into darkness. The keeper howled, his body unraveling into mist. For a single blinding moment, the sea itself recoiled, and then everything went black. When the storm finally cleared, the lighthouse stood silent. Its beacon was dark, its windows shattered. No trace of Emily or Daniel remained. But on quiet nights, when the sea is calm and the moon rides high, fishermen swear they see the light flicker back to life. And if you listen closely, you can hear voices in the waves, calling, always calling, for the next keeper to take their place. They said you could hear the voices if you pressed your ear to the stone walls. Not the kind of voices you hear in your head when you overtired or when grief is a fresh wound. These were wet voices, soaked with the salt of the sea, curling in from the black tide like serpents. Men who had drowned, women who had been pulled screaming into the surf, children who had slipped too far down the jagged cliffs, all whispering their secrets and begging for more company. The locals never spoke of the lighthouse. They pointed at it sometimes when the mist rolled in thick and the ocean foamed like a rabid dog, but they would not speak. To speak of it was to invite it. Everyone in County Clare knew that, but students, especially those who think fear is a superstition carried by old people with wrinkled hands, don't care about rules of silence. It began with a leather-bound book found in the archives of a forgotten church. The Diary of Seamus O'Dowd, last lighthouse keeper of Mower's Edge, dated 1913. Its pages crackled with mildew, its ink bled into the fibers. Every night, Seamus wrote the same line, scrawled in a frantic hand. They whisper from the sea, they call my name. And on the last page, the entry ended in words smeared with water damage. One more has joined us. That was the line that caught their eyes, the line that would drag them to the cliffs, whether they admitted it or not. The diary ended up in the hands of Mara Flynn, a history student from Trinity College, Dublin. Mara was the kind of girl who couldn't leave a locked door unopened, couldn't leave a question unanswered. She had a hunger for the hidden, and when she read the line "one more has joined us," her heart gave a little skip. She showed it to her flatmates, Declan loud-mouthed and too eager to impress, quiet and sharp as a blade, and Owen, the kind of boy who always carried a camera, but never seemed to take pictures of anything worth keeping. They sat in their dingy flat, the rain smearing the window like greasy tears, and passed the book around. "You know where this is, right?" Mara said, her green eyes glowing in the lamplight. "The cliffs just south of Lisconnor. That lighthouse hasn't been touched in decades." Declan snorted. "Ghost stories.
Ow.
The old drunkards in pubs spin this kind of shite all the time. My DA used to tell me the banshee wailed outside his window. Didn't he mean it was real? But wasn't he smiling?" She traced the words with one bitten fingernail. "We wrote this every night. They whisper from the sea. That's not a drunkard's tale. That's obsession. Madness." Mara leaned in, lowering her voice. "It's proof." They all knew what she meant. Proof that something lingered beyond the veil, that death wasn't silence, that the sea was not empty. And by the time the last pint had been drained, the dare had formed itself in the room like a fog, they would go. They would spend the night in the lighthouse of the cliffs of Mahar, and if whispers came, they would hear them for themselves. The drive to Clare took hours. The rain turned roads into rivers, and the sky into a low ceiling of bruised cloud. Their borrowed car rattled and shook as if protesting every mile. As they neared the coast, the land grew wild. Stone fences crumbled into the earth, sheep huddled in the fog like pale ghosts. And always the sound of the ocean grew louder, endless crashing. The roar of something too big, too alive, too hungry. They reached the village near Liscanor, just as dusk smeared itself across the horizon. The locals didn't welcome them. Eyes followed them from doorways, from pub windows, from behind the rain-glossed glass of shops. No one smiled. An old man in a cap shuffled past them and muttered, "Turn back, that don't belong there." But Declan only laughed, too loud, his voice carrying in the mist. "See? They're afraid of shadows. We'll have the whole place to ourselves." So they pressed on, the cliffs rising like jagged teeth ahead of them. By the time they reached the lighthouse, night had fallen fully. It stood black against the stormy sky, a tower of stone cracked and crumbling. Its windows were hollow eyes. The iron door hung open, rusted from salt and years of neglect. Mara's heart pounded in her chest, but she smiled anyway. "Welcome," she whispered to Mara's edge. The air inside was damp, thick with mold and salt. Their flashlights cut through it in weak beams. The ground floor was a ruin, broken furniture, rotted rope, the skeleton of a gull long dead. Graffiti carved by braver fools littered the walls, names, curses, dates. But under it all, faint and nearly erased by time, was a single sentence scratched deep into the stone. "They whisper from the sea." Owen filmed everything with his camera. "Jesus," he muttered. "It's real. It's all real." Touched the letters with trembling fingers. He wrote it here too, not just in the diary. The storm outside howled against the walls. The tower groaned with every gust. They set up their sleeping bags in what had once been the keeper's quarters. The room smelled of mildew and rust, but it was better than the stairwell, which spiraled up into darkness. Declan cracked open a beer. "To the whispering lighthouse," he toasted. "May it scare the shite out of us." But Mara didn't drink. Her ears were tilted toward the sea, straining. And faintly, so faintly, she thought she imagined it, she heard something beneath the waves. A murmur, a sigh, a whisper. It began after midnight. Mara was awake, staring at the cracked ceiling, when the sound slithered in through the stone. Not the storm, not the sea. Softer, closer. Mara. Her blood turned to ice. She sat up, heart pounding, ears ringing. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. Declan groaned from his bag. "Hear what? Christ, go to sleep." But then sat bolt upright, her face pale. "I heard it." "What did it say?" Mara asked, though she already knew. Its lips trembled. It said, "My name." Owen's camera light flicked on. His voice shook. I got it on tape, I think." They huddled together, the storm screaming outside, while the whispers bled through the walls. They didn't come all at once. They came in fragments, like the sea spitting out bones. "Declan, we know you." The cliffs remember, and the voices were wet, drowning. Some were men, some women, some children, all wrong. By dawn, none of them had slept. The second night was worse. The whispers grew clearer, louder. They no longer just said names, spoke things the students should not know. "Mara, we saw your mother cry when you left. We know what you did by the river, the boy who never came home." S face drained of blood at that one. She wouldn't speak for hours after. Declan tried to laugh it off, but his eyes twitched every time the whispers rose. "Declan, you dream of the rope. We saw you look at it in your father's shed." Owen filmed everything, desperate, whispering to himself that proof was all that mattered. But even he shook when the voices said, "Owen, why did you push her? You never told them the truth." The four of them sat in silence, the air heavy with unspoken sins. The lighthouse had teeth, and it was biting down. On the third night, Mara dreamed of Seamus O'Dowell. He stood at the foot of her sleeping bag, drenched, seaweed tangled in his beard. His eyes were hollow sockets filled with seawater, His voice was the same whisper she'd heard in the walls. "One more," he rasped. "Always one more." When she woke, the dream had followed her into daylight. The smell of salt and rot clung to her hair. They climbed the stairs that day up into the lantern room. The glass was shattered, the iron rusted, but the view was endless ocean on every side, roaring, devouring. In the dust, Mara found another scrawl, carved deep into the floorboards. "The sea takes what it is owed." Sleep became impossible. The whispers didn't wait for night anymore. They hissed through the cracks at noon, in the stairwell, in the spaces between breaths. Declan started shouting back at them. "Shut up, you don't know me. You're nothing but wind." But the voices only laughed, leapt silently at night, clutching her rosary until the beads cut her palms. Owen barely spoke anymore. He filmed the walls, the ceiling, the storm, muttering to himself, "Proof, proof, proof." And Mara felt herself slipping. Sometimes she thought she could make out words in the waves themselves. Sometimes she thought the sea was speaking directly to her. "Come closer. It's beautiful down here." On the fifth night, Declan vanished. One moment he was pacing the keeper's quarters, ranting, his beer clutched like a weapon. The next, the door slammed. They found him on the cliffs, standing at the edge, swaying. His eyes were wide, his mouth slack, as though listening to a lullaby only he could hear. "Mara," he whispered, "they're waiting." It took all three of them to drag him back, kicking and screaming. But by morning, he was gone again. His footprints led straight to the edge. And below, the sea foamed red for a moment before the tide carried it away. The whispers were constant now, louder than the storm, louder than thought. "One more has joined us." Mara could barely breathe. She felt the walls pulsing like a throat, like the lighthouse itself was alive. Owen finally snapped. He laughed, high and broken. "I see them, through the lens. They're down there, waiting." He stumbled toward the stairs, the camera clutched to his chest. Mara tried to hold him, but he was too strong. On the cliffs he turned, eyes wild, mouth stretched in a smile too wide. "Don't you hear them? They're calling me home." And then he leaped. The sea swallowed him whole. Only Mara remained. The lighthouse shook with the storm. Whispers were no longer whispers. They were screams, howls, demands. "Come to us. One more, clutched Mara, sobbing. "We have to leave. We have to." But the door was barred. When they tried to open it, the iron had fused to the stone, as if the sea itself had sealed them in. The air grew colder. The walls dripped salt water. And Mara realized this was never a place for light. This was a mouth, and it was hungry. By dawn, Mara stood at the edge. Her eyes were hollow. Her lips curved in a smile she did not feel. Screamed behind her, but the sound was drowned by the sea's chorus. They whispered her secrets, her fears, her dreams. They promised peace. They promised belonging. And when the sun broke the horizon, Mara stepped forward, arms wide, as if into an embrace. The sea caught her. Scream cut the sky in two. Back in the keeper's journal, the ink shifted, bleeding across the page, reshaping itself into fresh words. "One more has joined us." 22 years later, a group of tourists stood on the cliffs of Mahor, their jackets flapping in the wind, their laughter carried away by the roar of the sea. One of them, a German backpacker named Lucas, wandered a little too close to the edge. Something glinted in the rocks below. Later that evening, back in the hostel in Ennis, Lucas pried open the barnacle-crusted thing he'd pulled from a tide pool. Ow. It was a video camera. Old, rusted. The lens cracked, but the tape inside was still sealed. Curiosity got the better of him. He borrowed a dusty player from the hostel owner and slid the tape in. The screen flickered, static, dancing like fireflies. Then faces. For students, laughing nervously inside a ruined lighthouse. The wind howled against the microphone. A girl with green eyes whispered into the lens. "We're spending the night at Mower's Lighthouse. If you're watching this, maybe you'll know what we found." The footage jumped, distorted. Hours seemed to vanish in a blink. Then voices, wet, whispering voices so loud the speakers rattled. Lucas sat forward, pulse quickening. The camera showed the stairwell, the keeper's room, the carved words in the stone. But the voices grew sharper, clearer. They called names, not the names of those students. Names Lucas knew. Lucas. We saw you leave her behind in Berlin. His blood froze. The room felt too small. On screen, the last surviving student screamed as another leaped into the waves. His smile captured forever in flickering grain. And then the tape cut. The final frame showed the lighthouse against the dawn, the sea churning red. Words bled across the image, though no hand had written them. One more has joined us. The hostel owner found the room empty the next morning. Lucas's bed unslept in, his pack untouched, the window wide open. And far out at Mower's Edge, the sea whispered louder than ever. They say if you walk the Costa Brava shoreline at midnight, you can hear it. The clink of crystal glasses, the laughter of people long dead, and the hollow notes of a piano echoing across the waves. The sound drifts from the ruins of the Dune Hotel. Locals say no one who enters ever truly leaves. For friends wanted to test the legend, and the sea is still waiting for them. The night pressed heavy over the Mediterranean, a sky without stars, only a swollen moon drowning behind a quilt of clouds. The beach was nearly deserted. Only the crash of the tide filled the silence, that endless rhythm of the sea chewing on the rocks. At the far end of the shore rose the hulking carcass of a building, the Dune Hotel. Once, in the late 60s, it had been the gem of Costa Brava postcards printed with its image. Tourists from Paris and London fighting for reservations, bands playing till dawn, but the glamour didn't last. In July of 1973, the place shut down overnight. Rumors spread like a virus. Guests had vanished, staff had fled, whole families lost in the space of one summer. Now it leaned into the sea breeze like a drunk ready to topple. Windows busted out, balconies sagging, paint scabbed and peeling. 4 students stood watching it from the sand. Marta, sharp-eyed and skeptical, the one who always brought up the local legends in class. Lucas, tall, restless, hiding fear behind a smirk. Sergio, heavier set, nervous by nature, but unwilling to admit it. Eva, quiet, thoughtful, the kind who felt things deeper than she said. They were thrill seekers, urban explorers, chasing one last summer memory before graduation. Lucas broke the silence. Well, he said, kicking at the sand, this is it, the famous Death Hotel. Dune Hotel, Marta corrected. Her voice was low.
Oh.
Nobody calls it that around here anymore. They don't even like talking about it. Eva rubbed her arms, as if warding off a chill. Then why are we doing this again? Sergio said with a nervous chuckle. No one's stupid enough to spend the night inside, except us. He tried to laugh at his own joke, but the sound fell flat under the weight of the waves. The gate was wrought iron, leaning at an angle, eaten by rust. Lucas put both hands on it and shoved. It groaned like a dying animal before swinging open. Inside lay a courtyard littered with weeds and broken stone. A fountain stood in the center, a cracked cherub spitting nothing but spiders and rainwater. The front doors loomed ahead, one hanging from a hinge, the other pushed just far enough ajar to welcome them in.
Oh.
Like it's been waiting, Marta whispered. Sergio clicked on his flashlight. The beam cut through dust motes that hung in the air like ash. The smell hit them first. Mold, mildew, and something sweeter, rancid, like spilled wine left too long in the sun. This place reeks, Eva muttered. Right. It reeks of history, Lucas said, grinning. But the grin was pale, stretched thin across his face. The reception desk stood just inside the lobby, its mahogany warped and cracked. On top lay a leather guest book. It was fat, swollen with moisture, but still intact. Sergio leaned over it. The last entry was scrawled in dark, fading ink. 1 Alvarez, room 36. July 12th, 1973. The year the Dune Hotel had emptied. Marta felt her stomach twist. We shouldn't touch that. But Sergio had already flipped another page. They moved deeper, their footsteps muffled by the rotten carpet. The flashlight beams slid over cracked chandeliers, paint blistering off the walls, and dark stains they didn't want to think too hard about. Then, down the hall to the left, a light flickered. Eva froze. Did you see? Yeah, Lucas cut in. Some squatter with a lantern, or a bum. But when they edged closer, the glow brightened. A poured out of the double doors of what must once have been the dining hall. Marta pushed one door open and froze. The hall was alive. Tables draped in linen, crystal glasses catching the light. Silverware gleaming, polished as though by invisible hands. The air itself seemed brighter, warmer, as if the past had returned for one last toast. And the tables weren't empty. Dozens of people sat eating, drinking, laughing. Men in pressed suits, women in gowns of silk and satin. Their faces blurred out of focus like old photographs smeared with age. There was no sound, only the sight of mouths moving, hands gesturing, forks rising, a feast in silence. Then one by one, their heads turned toward the doorway, toward the four intruders. Marta gasped and yanked the others back. The light went out. In an instant, the room was bare again. Tables overturned, broken chairs scattered, dust swirling in the cold air. Ava was trembling. They saw us. I swear to God, they saw us. Lucas tried to laugh. Just a trick. Reflection, maybe. Ghastly hallucinations or something. But no one was laughing with him. That was when the piano began. A slow, mournful melody, drifting from upstairs. Each note dragging like a stone pulled through water. Maybe somebody really is here, Sergio whispered, playing. No one's here, Marta said. Her voice was tight. No one alive. They followed the sound up the staircase, each step groaning under their weight. The hallway stretched long, lined with doors swollen shut from humidity. At the far end, a cracked door stood open, yellow light spilling out. Inside was a room filled with mirrors, dozens of them. On the walls, leaning against chairs, cracked and shattered in spiderweb patterns. A grand piano crouched in the corner, its ivory keys moving though no hands touched them. The melody floated through the air like a funeral march. Eva gripped Marta's arm. This isn't possible. Nothing about this place is possible, Sergio muttered. Lucas swung his flashlight across the biggest mirror. He froze. The mirror showed them all, but wrong. The reflections were smiling, grinning wide, toothy smiles, while their real faces were twisted with fear. And behind the reflections stood a fifth figure, a tall waiter in a tuxedo, balancing a silver tray. The waiter's lips moved. This time, the voice came clear, low and formal. Welcome to the Dune Hotel. Your dinner awaits. The four of them stumbled back, but the mirror stayed fixed. The reflection waiter didn't vanish, didn't blur away like the dinner guests downstairs. Instead, he bowed, slow, elegant, like he was on stage, performing for them. His silver tray glittered. And then, impossibly, the tray pressed against the inside of the mirror, pushing through the glass as though it were water. Sergio swore under his breath, yanking Lucas's arm. We need to leave now. This isn't funny. The waiter straightened. His grin sharpened, stretching unnaturally wide. Then his voice seeped into the room again, oily and soft. No one leaves hungry. The piano crashed into silence. Every mirror in the room cracked at once. 100 shards rained to the floor, exploding in the flashlight beams like knives of light. Eva screamed. Lucas grabbed her hand and pulled her into the hallway, Marta and Sergio stumbling after them. But as they ran, they heard footsteps behind them, polished, steady. The sound of shoes that had never touched dust, following close, closer, until it stopped. They froze. The hallway was empty. Don't look back, Marta whispered. Her heart thundered in her chest. Just keep moving. The hallway bent sharply left, then ended at a door that hung half open. A brass number plate clung crookedly to the wood. 306, Ava's face drained of color. The guest book. The name. Juan Alvarez. Room 36. July 12, 1973. The last man ever checked into the Dune Hotel. Lucas shoved the door. It creaked inward. The room was preserved almost untouched. The bed still made, though the sheets were yellow with rot. A suitcase lay open on the chair, clothes spilling from it like a wound that had never closed. And on the desk sat a wallet. Inside the ID card of Juan Alvarez, Sergio lifted it with shaking hands. He was real. He was here. Then Eva whispered, "Look." On the far wall above the bed were 5 words, scratched deep into the plaster. No one leaves the dune. The letters were jagged, torn into the wall with fingernails until they bled. Dried brown smears still clung to the grooves. Marta's stomach turned. "This is a warning." "No," Lucas said, his voice thin. "It's a promise." They bolted out of 3-6, slamming the door behind them. Their footsteps hammered down the corridor. But halfway down, Sergio splashed. He looked down. Water pooled around his shoes, rippling outward. The carpet was soaked, squelching. Within seconds, the water climbed to their ankles. "This is impossible," Eva gasped. "We're 3 floors up." The water was rising fast, seeping from under the doors, rushing from unseen cracks in the walls. Cold, salty, stinking of the sea, Marta's flashlight beam cut through it, and she saw faces under the surface. Dozens of them. Eyes wide, mouths open, bubbles escaping in silence as they drifted just beneath the water like corpses suspended in glass. One face rose closest, the face of Juan Alvarez. His lips moved soundlessly, forming a single word: "Run." The water surged upward, crashing against their knees. They scrambled, splashing, slipping, grabbing the stairwell railing and hauling themselves up the steps, just as the corridor behind them drowned completely. From below came the hollow, echoing roar of the sea filling the Dune Hotel from the inside. The staircase twisted higher, finally spilling them into the top floor. The ballroom. Here the ceiling stretched high, painted with faded murals of cherubs and clouds. A chandelier, heavy with dust, dangled like a severed head. The shadows moved. Not from their flashlights, these were independent, writhing. Long black silhouettes danced across the cracked parquet floor, bowing and spinning in pairs, though no bodies cast them. The air was alive with whispers, snatches of conversation, laughter, sobs, gasps, all overlapping like a broken radio tuning to many stations at once. Lucas raised his light. For a moment he swore he saw himself on the floor, dancing with a woman in a silver gown. Her face was turned away, but her hair floated around her head as if underwater. When he blinked, she was gone. Ava's voice was a tremor. "They're not shadows, they're memories." Marta shook her head.
"Oh."
"They're invitations." Because the shadows were gathering closer, circling, reaching. Hands stretched up from the floor, not shadows anymore, but blackened. Skeletal fingers clutching at their shoes, their legs dragging them toward the dance. They tore free, shoving through a side door, crashing into another corridor. The building groaned around them, old wood warping, beams creaking under invisible pressure. Then they smelled it again. Salt. The sea was here. Ahead, the hallway ended in glass doors that once opened onto a terrace. But beyond the glass, instead of the night sky, the ocean pressed in. Vast and endless. A wall of water holding itself at bay, rippling and surging against invisible boundaries.
"Oh."
Fish drifted past. A stingray glided by, its wings brushing the glass.
"Oh."
And farther back, something huge, moved, dark, slow, patient. The 4 of them stood frozen, hearts hammering. Then a crack split the glass. A thin jet of seawater hissed into the corridor, spraying cold across Marta's face. Another crack. Another. The glass spiderwebbed. The roar of the ocean pressed louder, closer, until it seemed the whole hotel was trembling beneath its weight. Eva screamed. "It's going to break." They turned and ran. The stairwell twisted down again, but the building shifted beneath them, tilting as if sinking. Paint peeled from the walls in long strips. Every step rattled. Then, at the landing, he was waiting. The waiter, tall, immaculate, tuxedo pressed as though ironed seconds before. His silver tray balanced perfectly in one hand. Only this time, what lay upon it wasn't food. It was a row of rusted hotel keys. He bowed, smiling. His teeth were too many, too sharp. "Your rooms are ready," he said, voice silk and venom. "Check in. It's forever." Sergio charged first, terror overriding sense. He swung his flashlight at the waiter's head. The beam passed through him. The waiter didn't even flinch. Instead, his hand lashed out, impossibly fast. Fingers like iron clamped around Sergio's throat, lifting him clear off the ground. Sergio choked, kicking, clawing. His face purpled. Lucas lunged forward, grabbing Sergio's arm, yanking hard. Marta and Eva screamed, pulling too. For one blinding second, the waiter's face stretched, twisting into something inhuman. Hollow-eyed and grinning with a mouth that unhinged far too wide, Then Sergio fell to the floor. The waiter was gone. But the silver tray remained, clattering to the tiles. The hotel keys scattered across the steps. Each tag gleamed with a number. They burst into the lobby, gasping, desperate, half carrying Sergio between them. The doors were just ahead. Freedom, the night beyond, waited like salvation. But when Lucas shoved the door, it didn't move. He shoved harder. Nothing. Through the cracks of the wood, the sea peered back at them. Endless black water lapping at the steps, rising slowly, swallowing the courtyard, the fountain, the gate. The ocean had sealed them in. No, Eva whispered. Her voice broke. This isn't real. This can't be real. Marta's eyes fell to the guest book on the reception desk. It was open again, though none of them had touched it. A pen lay across the page, its tip dripping fresh black ink. A new line was written beneath Juan Alvarez's name. Marta Delgado, room 302, August 29th, 2025. Lucas Pereira, room 304, August 29th, 2025. Sergio, room Seni Wu, August 29th, 2025. The ink glistened wet. Sergio staggered forward, shaking his head. No, that's not us. It's not. The front doors creaked. Slowly, they began to open, inward, not outward. And on the threshold stood the waiter. He bowed. Welcome, he said. We've been waiting. The sea roared in behind him, and the Dune Hotel swallowed them whole.